this is to put a few more guidelines in place, and we could call them design guidelines. I think that's the way to get the outcome that we all want.
Well, and so for a clarifying question, is it explain the difference, because right now they've been developed in this area, right? They just have to develop according to whatever the current zoning is, which is a lot of different zonings. And so it's developable now. It would obviously be developable under C3A. What we're not talking about really is the zoning, but as Commissioner Bender talked about, we're talking about these overlays, guidelines, et cetera. So how does the imposition of those guidelines on the current zoning versus the proposed C3A zoning significantly differ? Because we can have zoning in the interim in both instances without any of that guideline.
That's true, but I think there's an opportunity cost. I think the true value of this corridor in particular is going to be realized once we have the public realm framework in place and the streetcar more down the path. It should have been further down the path by now, and that we can't really control that. That's more of a SHPO issue. But once we have that in place, the value of the parcels abutting Nicollet Avenue will rise. And I think there has been several discussions around this with multiple people involved in the streetcar planning, multiple people kind of within the enterprise. This is not, I would say this is not a disagreement about the outcome that's desired. It's a disagreement about the steps to get there.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll say just as sort of a thought on my own that the timeline of the streetcar worries me, particularly because in our paperwork here, one of the contingencies for the streetcar is a state transportation bill, which is entirely out of our control.
Yeah.
And so we have an indeterminate lag, which I guess I'm just noting my own worry.
Noted. I think yes, that is true. I think that having both Scott Dibble and Governor Dayton really pushing for a regional tax to support this ongoing need for operations is certainly on the plus side. And I will also say that because we've already established the value capture, and really the city has committed $60 million, it puts us ahead of almost everyone in terms of federal consideration. So we've had very, very positive responses from the feds. If the city has committed this money and we have federal support, I think it would be very, very difficult for the legislature to turn that away. Okay.
Commissioner Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say I understand why folks are kind of pushing back on a delay, but I support this approach because I think that we can work together with the folks who've put so much time and thought into this to get something more out of the rezoning than we could if we just upzoned it. And we, I think we've missed opportunities to do that in the past. And there's no reason we shouldn't be looking at what we could require of this development here that we really do not have the ability to do today. We have some site plan review requirements. We can have Commissioner Kronzer try to redesign buildings on the fly at Planning Commission, which we all enjoy. But we don't have, a lot of legal levers to make sure that we're getting that vision that I know the community has put so much time into. And I think a very small amount of more time, along with the expertise that we have now in the long range planning department, will help us get to that better outcome. So I'm supportive of this phased approach for that reason.
All right. Are there any other questions of staff? Commissioner Gisselman.
I just had one question for Beth. Just regarding the down zoning of the Basilica, were we to approve this rezoning study with that exception, what concerns would staff have with that? I'm trying to understand. I know you spoke a little bit about this.
Can you clarify that a little bit? What type of concerns do you think?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to understand is just a little bit more about, obviously we heard from the representative there at the parish suggesting that they would prefer to preserve the current zoning
Sure.
as opposed to what's being recommended. And if we adopt the recommendations from staff here today, with the exception of that rezoning, what concerns would you have with that, or what would the problem
Specifically
be with
for
that?
the Basilica?
Yes.
Okay.
With just the Basilica, yes.
So, without any plans yet for the Basilica, the main difference would be the height difference between 6, what they have now, and 4 stories, which is what's proposed under the OR2. That's the main difference. None of the functions and uses on the sites as we know it would be impacted by that rezoning. Does that give you enough information?
And so I guess
We don't have concerns.
you don't have concerns. I guess my question though is what would the concern be if we went along with the parish's request to not change their rezoning designation as part of our, our decision that we make tonight? What would staff? I'm trying to figure out what
Staff would have no concerns about
what
that.
is the problem with that? Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Kronzer.
I have the same question for St. Mark's. It seems if we change the zoning recommendation on one institutional church in the neighborhood, that it might make sense to do that for St. Mark's as well.
Commissioner Kronzer, can you do you have in front of you which zoning, what we're proposing to rezone St. Mark's?
I scribbled it out. I believe that's OR2.
OR2. Yeah, and again, that reflects the height guidance in the plan. We wouldn't have any concerns generally or specifically about St. Mark's either staying OR3. We were just trying to be very consistent with the plan guidance for height.
Are there any other questions of staff? I have a quick question. At least one of the speakers had referenced the Shoreland Overlay District as it relates to Loring Pond. It doesn't appear that there are any changes proposed to that as part of this rezoning study, but have there been discussions about eliminating that, or are there any potential long-term impacts we should be thinking about?
The area still has the Shoreland Overlay District. So technically any property owner or developer who seeks to go above 2.5 stories within that overlay district will be applying for a CUP. We've had internal discussions about the value or lack thereof of this particular shoreland overlay, but we are not proposing with this rezoning study to eliminate it. It seems like it needs to be a broader discussion about the shoreland overlay within the entire city.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of staff? If there are none, would someone like to start things off with a motion? Commissioner Gisselman.
I would move approval of the rezoning study and its recommendations, again, with the exception of the parcels at the Basilica, which would maintain their present zoning status, which I believe right now is OR3.
All right. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Commissioner Kronzer.
Yes, I would like to also add that the St. Mark's maintain their OR3 zoning status as well.
All right. And is there a second to that? Okay. We have a motion and a second, and we can add that to the motion with a voice vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. All right. And that motion carries. Commissioner Lupke-Peter.
I guess I just, I support the motion, but I have a few comments. One would be in terms of the phase 2 aspect of this. I wish we could almost have a timeline for it, because I can see the need and the benefit of how this would actually be a tool for the neighborhood to further realize their vision. But I also know that when you've spent many years crafting a vision, it seems like a long time to see anything realized. And then so I feel like if you can tell when the horizon's coming, it might be kind of a helpful thing. So maybe perhaps some of us can ponder that. I did want to say though, just on a personal note as a commissioner, as we've seen a lot of plans and rezoning studies over the years, the one thing that I really appreciate is when a neighborhood realizes it's part of the larger city. And when a neighborhood comes forward and they recognize the assets that they have and the value that it brings to the city, but also recognizes that they have need to help us meet our larger goals of having a healthier, more sustainable city, and tells us we recognize we need density and here's where we think we should put it. I think that that's wonderful. I applaud neighborhoods that recognize preserving the gems they have and also making room for new people to move in and appreciate them. So I just want to say thank you for recognizing that there's a place for more people to move into your neighborhood and noting where that is and where you want it to be and how it contributes to neighborhood, and also recognizing the value of your hill, which I think as the years go by will be even more and more valuable as an asset to the city as a whole. So I just wanted to appreciate that, because it seems oftentimes neighborhoods don't want increased density, and we have to find a place to put it if they don't tell us where to put it. So thank you for telling us. But yes, a timeline would be nice.
Commissioner Magrino.
I have a question maybe for Mr. Wittenberg. Is there a way that we could put some sort of condition on the approval here that the phase 2 part of this has to be wrapped up within a certain amount of time, or is that like putting a condition on ourselves? Because I would tend to agree with Commissioner Rockwell that the streetcar is probably pretty far away, but we could probably knock out a lot of those design guidelines pretty easily in the next 6 or 12 months, and that might kind of deal with some of the uncertainty here.
Commissioners, you can't really condition the rezoning study on a timeline for future phases, but you can certainly make a strong recommendation that would be considered by CPED staff in their work plan.
All right. Any further discussion? Commissioner Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still concerned about the conflict that is created by the map that's in the small area plan and the zoning change to OR2. And I know we had discussed the OR2 versus OR3 at length at that CPC COW, and folks had expressed different opinions about the zoning. I'm okay with the zoning change myself, just speaking for myself personally, but I would like to include direction or recommendation that staff start a process of looking at that. I know the plan has been adopted, so I would look to staff to help me clarify how that action would be taken. But I would feel more comfortable with this if we were really relying on the zoning to control, instead of creating this inherent conflict that we have again seen time and time again recently, where the policy guidance is a little unclear with the zoning.
Okay, are there any further discussion? Yeah, maybe Mr. Wittenberg, you could address that.
I'm going to defer to Ms. Elliott on that one if she has some ideas about crafting a
Councilmember, I'm going to ask for some clarification. I think what you're referring to is the built form plan in the adopted plan and its height, but I'm not certain what direction you're looking for.
I guess I'm suggesting that we, as a body, recommend revisiting that part of the small area plan.
That could simply be part of the recommendation, similar to what Commissioner Magrino recommended. If there's a commission consensus about sort of staff direction that the commission would like to adopt in conjunction with whatever phase moves forward today, that would be perfectly acceptable.
I think what the council member might be referring to is a policy amendment. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And so I think what you would need to do is direct us to conduct a policy analysis and potential amendment to the Loring Park Neighborhood Master Plan. It would need to go through its own community engagement process, its own planning process, and maybe making reference to the built form plan would be helpful for us as staff.
Okay, Commissioner Lukey here.
Well, I just, for the record, would not be in favor of moving it from the OR2 to OR3. I feel like the point of the neighborhood's master plan was it was very clear the direction they were given, and I think the justification is very strong. And I feel like changing it at this point, maybe if they were trying to downzone every area in their neighborhood, maybe we'd say, okay, you need to revisit something because you're actually kicking people out. But since they're the ones pushing tonight to have increased zoning on Nicollet and we're making them wait, it seems a little bit underhanded to then take away an important cornerstone of their plan to say, well, we're not sure about that either. It seems like we're almost playing with their plan too much. So I guess I think that this very clearly is a zoning articulation of their vision, and maybe the other half would have been too if we'd proceeded. But I think since we're putting them on hold to make it happen, it just changes too much of the intent of what they did instead of complying with it and honoring it.
Commissioner Bender.
Just to clarify, I was stating support for the OR2 zoning. However, expressing concern that because what we have seen in the past with height being a very explicit piece of a small area plan, even though our zoning still allows for additional height through a conditional use permit process, which is a legal process, which as commissioners and council members, we need to adhere to, that I would suggest that we relook at that particular piece of the small area plan, again, because now the zoning will reflect that desire to have a lower height as well as a higher threshold for increasing the height there, that having that inherent conflict isn't really necessary because the zoning is reflecting that desire.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Commissioner Kronzer.
Just one. I'm going to make my plea again that we undertake small area plans and rezoning studies at the same time so we can have shorter public hearings. No, that's not the reason. But I believe the outcome will be a better outcome in the future.
And Commissioner Rockwell.
I don't know if this is a question for Commissioner Magrino. Did we actually? I would like to support Commissioner Magrino's recommendation that we encourage a relatively rapid look. I don't have a timeline, but a relatively rapid look at finding some of these whatever it would be overlay something within the public realm guidelines and streetcar master plan and so on, so that we can respect the timeline while also respecting the process that Commissioner Bender pointed out, which I think it is worth waiting in order to do the best job possible. We have too many quick moves without the long term in mind. So I do support the delay.
All right. If there's no further discussion, maybe I will just quickly repeat the motion language since it is very specific. The motion was that we approve the zoning map amendment for the rezoning of parcels in the attached exhibits and find that obtaining consent signatures for the rezoning of properties from residential to commercial in the Loring Park rezoning study would be impractical. We had we had two amendments to that. One is that we keep the zoning of the Basilica properties, that is those three properties on the northwest corner of 16th Street and Hennepin Avenue, OR3 rather than OR2 as shown in the exhibit, and also keep the St. Mark's property on the southeast corner of 15th Street and Hennepin Avenue, OR3 rather than OR2 as shown. And I'll just say, a couple things, and several people had testified in support of changing the zoning along Nicollet as well. And I just wanted to mention that it seems pretty unanimous among the commission that we're very interested in changing the zoning there as well relatively soon. So I think it's pretty widely supported that we'd strongly encourage staff to continue working on that. And if it seems like some of those studies aren't moving along very quickly, maybe that can be reconsidered, because I think that is an area that has a lot of development potential. And in the recent past, we have seen some of the dangers of leaving C1 and C2 zoning on the ground in areas that do have a lot of development pressure. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. As for the downzoning of the Loring Hill area, I think again there's pretty unanimous support for doing that, and I just wanted to echo Commissioner Bender's concerns. You know, I like the Loring Park master plan, and I think the neighborhood certainly did a very impressive job of community engagement. I do think the implication of hard and fast height limits is a little bit of a concern, and the plan maybe implied that a little more strongly than I would have liked to see. And I remember raising that issue a couple of years ago when we saw that, just because, as Commissioner Bender said, our zoning districts don't really have those hard and fast height limits. So it's important to consider that existing zoning framework when we come up with these policies. So we have a motion and a second. We have a little bit further discussion. Commissioner Bender and Commissioner Magrino.
Okay. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there, actually. Do you want to go? You can make a motion.
I think that's what Jason's saying. Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll make a motion to reflect those two comments, if that's helpful, and then we can vote on those just so we're all clear what we're saying. So I move that we, as a planning commission, recommend that staff bring back their recommendations related to phase 2 within 12 months, and that we also recommend staff reopen the small area plans policy guidance related to built form to reflect the decisions we're making in the zoning update. And then I would briefly speak to that, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. I also just want to say, we're making some few procedural changes here, but I don't think it's meant in the spirit of undermining all of the work that went into this plan. I love this neighborhood. I lived here briefly when this plan started, and I know we all know how important this part of the city is to linking downtown to the communities farther south. The amount of care you've given to looking at how you can grow thoughtfully in the context of the city is very notable. And it's really great to see everyone come out and talk about all of these, like a way that a neighborhood can grow in a thoughtful way that's really embracing of all the different folks who've lived in this neighborhood for a long time from all different walks of life. So really appreciate all the work that went into it. And this is the things that I'm suggesting are really meant in the spirit of supporting that work that has gone into it.
All right, then Commissioner Magrino.
Remember what I was going to say. And yeah, I would just want to sort of strongly support revisiting some of the built form assumptions in the neighborhood master plan. I live in Loring Park currently, and I've lived in a 9-story building and a 20-story building on Oak Grove Street. And certainly I think everybody really likes the 4-story brownstones, but that's really not even like the dominant building on that street. And so I think everybody wants to be respectful of those properties, but I don't know that this is necessarily, that kind of limit is not necessarily something we want to put in stone for like 30 or 40 or 50 years. That's kind of what this would end up doing.
Okay, so we have a couple of additional items that were added to that motion related to staff bringing back a recommendation on phase 2 of the rezoning study within 12 months, and also conducting some policy analysis related to the built form plan. If there's no further discussion on the motion, clerk, please call the roll.
Bender?
Aye.
Forney?
Aye.
Gisselman?
Aye.
Kranzer?
Aye.
Lipke-Peer?
Aye.
Slack?
Aye.
Magrino?
Aye.
Rockwell?
Aye.
So that is 8-0.
Okay, and that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 2. Our next item for discussion is item 4, Carmel Plaza and Square on Pillsbury Avenue South, and staff is Andrew Liska. And we held the public hearing on this item on September 21st. So the public hearing is now closed. We had asked for some additional clarification from staff, specifically related to our ability to limit the specific uses within the addition that is proposed on this property. So maybe Mr. Liska, you can speak to that item and anything else that's come up in the last few weeks.
Good evening, Chair, Commission members. This application again was heard on September 21st and it was continued. It is for the expansion of a non-conforming use and site plan review associated with the proposed expansions to the first, second, third, and fourth floors. Floors 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all proposed to expand to the interior of the courtyard, and the third floor is proposed to extend on the north side toward the Midtown Greenway. These applications were discussed and continued. As the Commission requested staff to follow up with two main concerns: limiting the uses in the expansion of the structure, as well as parking concerns, specifically parking tickets in the area. Staff met with the city attorney in getting a determination regarding the Commission's authority in limiting the uses of the expansion. The city attorney concluded that even if the Commission approved the physical expansion of the structure, the Commission is still able to limit the uses in the areas being expanded. Traffic control has also provided documentation of tickets in the area from March 1st to October 15th, and that information is in the packet. It's pretty self-explanatory. I can go over that if anyone has any questions. And I'll be here for any other additional questions as well.
All right. Commissioners, are there any questions for Mr. Wiska? Commissioner Rockwell, are you about to speak?
Could we at some point see the rationale for being able to limit uses in the areas being expanded? We don't have to right now, but just out of curiosity for our future headspace.
For sure.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I will, actually the public hearing on this item is already closed, so I won't open the public hearing. Commissioners, would someone like to start us off with a motion if there are no further questions? Commissioner Cron.
I do have a question for staff. So if the Planning Commission were to limit the uses, how would the city ensure that the uses were in fact limited per the recommendations of the City Planning Commission and ultimately City Council? What's the mechanism for ensuring compliance?
Chairman Brown, Commissioner Kronzer, staff has concerns about coming up with a complicated condition of approval. This is a shopping center. We typically do not go into shopping centers and check all the tenants all the time. We don't require them to amend CUPs when they get CUPs. Think of how that would stifle the marketplace. So in fact, what has to happen is they generally will be out there checking for the building to make sure the building is constructed to the building plan. There's license inspectors that go by and do periodic checks on the licenses that are held. That typically involves seating area and other things. Generally, these are on a complaint basis. Some properties, some subject properties generate more complaints than others, but absent those complaints, we're not going to be out typically checking these things. I think I encourage the Planning Commission to come up with a clean, workable set of conditions of approval if that's what you want to do. But generally speaking, these things are done through the licensing regimen and then through the building permit to make sure it's constructed right. But the zoning inspectors don't routinely go through these uses to make sure they're in compliance with the plans. We go on complaint based.
Okay.
Am I allowed to speak with the applicant's attorney?
Yeah, if there are questions, are there any questions of the applicant? I don't believe there are any. Commissioners, we have two applications before us. Yeah, actually, maybe it would be appropriate to hear from the applicant just because we do have some new information.
Well, just briefly, and I hope that the Robert Speeder, attorney, address 201 South 11th Street, is my home. Now I just moved downtown, but office is 120 South 6th Street. I'm representing Sabri Properties here, and I just try to be brief. I know some of the commissioners weren't at the last hearing, and where a number of people did speak from the community, all for this project, and spoke quite eloquently at what a difference this project made for the community. But going to the issue that we had, last time when we dealt with, the main issue was parking, was one of the big concerns. And I think I hope you've received a new traffic demand management plan that showed that this will not have any material or be nothing more than minimal impacts on traffic and parking numbers from the previous TDMP. So with that, I think the major concern has been addressed. We've tried to look at the figures, but one thing I can say is at no time has a new parking garage, which has only been open for 45 days, been full. But it is a well-used garage. It's always has a number of cars, but there's always spaces left. The applicant has reasonably and comprehensively addressed the parking issues and the traffic issues. And I think staff's recommendations are appropriate. We meet all of the 6 criteria for a conditional use permit. A very brief history for those that weren't here last time. This project was first approved as a farmer's market in 2003, and it was a unique concept, this kind of a mall catering to the Somali community at